Today's daf is daf Kuf Hey, and the last issue that we addressed was a machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai about a person who ate meat and now he wants to eat cheese. And there are two possible requirements besides waiting, and they are kinuach and mediach. And it seems at the beginning of the sugya that Beit Shammai advocates in favor of kinuach, which we'll see means that he has to take a piece of bread and chew on it, whereas Beis Hillel advocate in favor of hadocha, which means to rinse out your mouth. At the end of the day, the Gemara comes to the conclusion that both Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai agree, and they were just giving, each one was emphasizing one dimension, but both Beit Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that he has to do both. He's got to rinse out his mouth, and he's got to sort of wipe out the inside of his mouth through eating a piece of bread. And we'll see, and we've already touched on this, that there are certain requirements about what the bread is that qualifies. So that at the end of the day, Mara Merchadu, Mara Merchad. That's where we ended yesterday. And today, Mirz Hashem, we begin with Gufa. So Gufa on Daf Kuf Hey begins approximately, I would say, maybe 12 lines down from the top of the page. The first word in the line is Omar. So Gufa Omar Abi Zera, Ein Kinuach Apela B'Pas. When we speak about the requirement of Kinuach, having eaten meat and now he wants to eat dairy, it's referring to a piece of bread, and not just any piece of bread, but there are various conditions and requirements. Number one is hani mili berechiti alo b'siori lo. So you have white bread, which is made out of wheat, and you have barley bread made out of barley. And the effective wiping out of the inside of the mouth is with white, what do you call it? Wheat bread, but not with barley bread, because apparently what we need is a kind of a bread that will softly land in between the teeth, as opposed to something that crumbles. And it seems that barley bread crumbles into small pieces inside of the mouth, so it won't really do the job to wipe away, any residue of meat or cheese. Actually, let's leave out the case of meat, because we're going to see soon in the sugya that after eating meat, you have to wait a certain period of time before you could eat dairy. So let's talk about the case where he's eating dairy and he's allowed to eat meat immediately afterwards, but we're requiring hadach, and in this case, kinuach. So the kinuach has to be, number one, with wheat bread as opposed to barley bread. And not any wheat bread will qualify, but udachiti nami lamerel bekrira, aval bechamima mishtar shtori. So that if the bread is too hot, then it won't do the job. You should have like room temperature bread, but not hot bread, because in the case of hot bread, then apparently the bread doesn't really clean out the cheese. It doesn't go between the teeth, but rather it gets like stuck in the palate. And not only that, even if you have cold wheat bread, that's not sufficient. Tani mi l'berechicha, al bakusha lo. So if you leave wheat bread too long, it starts getting hard. That's not going to be good for the quinoa chapeh because it starts to crumble. And therefore, you need it to be soft bread, and then it is effective. So we have three conditions. Number one, it's got to be wheat bread. Number two, it's got to be cold bread. And number three, it's got to be soft bread. Hilchasa, however, even after Rabbi Zera produces these rulings with all these conditions, la halacha, the Gemara paskins, bechol mili havi kinuach, you can use any bread whatsoever to wipe out your mouth after the cheese. It could be barley bread, it could be warm bread, it could even be hard bread. However, there's one exception to the rule, which disqualifies it for kinuach. Lebar mikincha tamri v'yarka. You cannot use number one, kimcha, which is kemach flour. Number two, you can't use dates, which is called tmorim. And number three, you can't use vegetables. And the reason why these don't qualify is because when you have a cooked vegetable, then I guess it sort of like falls apart in your mouth. It's so soft. And we need something that has at least some element of hardness that it could enter between the teeth. So again, the final conclusion here is if you ate cheese and now you want to eat meat, you've got to, number one, wash your hands and check out your hands to make sure that there's no residue of cheese. That might not apply if there's plenty of light. So you don't have to wash your hands, just check the hands. And number two, you have to chew on something solid, but not on flour, dates, or vegetables. And finally, you need hadochas hapeh, which means to rinse out your mouth with a liquid. Now, let's take a break from the discussion of cheese first and then meat. Now let's go the other way around. He's eating meat and he's going to want to eat cheese. How much of a period of time does he have to wait after eating meat until he can eat dairy? And as you all know, I don't have to discover America. There are many different answers to that question. The classic answer is 6 hours, but the Rambam says kishay shos, which might mean into the sixth hour or halfway into the sixth hour, 5.5 hours. Then you have the minhag of 3 hours. You have a minhag of 1 hour. You have a minhag of immediately after you finish. That's the Dutch minhag. If you know that immediately after you finish meat, you could eat cheese. Now, initially, the Dutch minhag appears here in the Gemara, but the Gemara then immediately rejects it. Amalei, so Rabbi Yochanan responds to Rav Asi, "V'lo klum." After I eat meat, I can eat cheese. I don't have to wait at all. Eini, could that be so? V'amar Rav Chizda, ochal basar asal echal gvina. After you eat meat, you're not allowed to immediately eat cheese, but you have to wait a while. We don't know exactly how long. And gvina, on the other hand, we're more makel if you started with dairy and now you want to eat meat, you could do that immediately as long as you have those three conditions. His hands are clean, he wipes out his mouth, and he rinses out his mouth. Fine. And now the Gemara says that we have to go back to the drawing board and figure out what Rabbi Yochanan had in mind when he said v'lo klum. We don't want that to contradict Rav Chizda, who says that ochel basar also lechal gvina. So the Gemara answers, Kama Yisha ben Gvina lebasar. The original question was not about eating milchiks after fleishiks, meaning cheese after meat, but rather the other way around. Cheese, and then he wants to eat meat. Homalei, and on that question, Rabbi Yochanan responded, klum, lo klum. He doesn't have to wait at all. Now, let's get back to this question about Rav Chizda's statement that after you eat meat, you're not allowed to eat cheese. Gufa, Amar Rav Chizda, Ocha basar asa lechel din, gevina muter lechel basar. Okay, fine. So how long after you eat meat are you prohibited from eating dairy? I mean, for the rest of your life? For a week, for a day, for an hour? How long? Amalei Rav Acha bar Yosef Rav Chizda, basar sheben hashinayim ma. What we have a problem with is that after you eat meat, you're not finished with meat. Meat lingers on because it gets stuck in between the teeth. And the Torah says, it's called meat, even though it's between the teeth. So you see that even basar ben hashinaim is considered basar, and therefore the isur of eating milchiks with basar still applies as long as he has, pieces of meat stuck in between his teeth. Okay, so now how long does it take until the basar ben hashinaim is rid of, you rid of it. Amar Am Ukva, Anola Milsa Chalabar Chamra Gabe Abba. Okay, we'll get back to that in a second, but let's just read the punchline. Abba ki avi achel bisra idna lo avi achel gvina ad lemachar ki hashta. Now, Mar Ukva testifies about his father that his father, after he ate meat, would wait me'es la'es on the clock, 24 hours from the time that he finished his meat until he would eat milchiks. So could you just imagine, in our context, the father of Mar Ukva, let's say we would eat meat tonight, and tomorrow morning we want to have cereal with milk or yogurt with berries, whatever your favorite dairy food is. He can't do it until a full 24 hours, by which time, you want to eat meat again. So you'll never eat milchiks for the rest of your life. So let's go back to the opening mashal of Mar Ukva. He says, Anola Milsa, regarding this issue of how long you have to wait to eat milchiks after fleishiks, I'm like, shall we say, the son of wine, and no, in other words, my father is wine. I'm the son. I'm like spoiled wine, meaning I'm like vinegar compared to wine. Obviously, wine is much more precious and much more significant. And how so? Vilu anah behasauda hudala achilna l'suda achrita achilna. I'll just wait after I finish the meal with fleishiks, and then I'll eat cheese or milks. Now, what does this mean in the next Seudah? According to many Rishonim, and that seems to be the well-accepted minhag, Miseudah l'Suda is 6 hours. And that has to do with the way today we eat three meals a day. In those days, they had 2 meals a day. So they would have, let's say, the first meal, lamazagin, at 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so you wait 6 hours. Now it's 5 p.m. in the afternoon, and you're ready for dinner. So all told, there's a 6-hour wait between one Seudah and another. If we go to the other extreme, then we terminate our Seudah of fleishiks, and we bench, and then we start another Seudah, we can eat milchiks. That's also Miseudah l'Suda. And in the middle between these two extremes, we have all sorts of different shittas, as I mentioned before, about how long is considered Miseudah l'Suda. I do want to mention something that I found fascinating. in the name of Rav Gustman. Does that name mean anything to you? No? Anyway, Rav Yisrael Gustman, was a an absolute genius, a great Talmid Chacham. His entire family was murdered in front of his eyes by the Nazis. He somehow escaped into the woods. And you can see his yeshiva today if you're in Rechavia on Rehov Ramban. There's a beautiful building. Anyway, that's where he had his yeshiva. Why do I mention Rav Gustman? Because in his yeshiva, they served they served milchiks for dinner, which is quite common here in Israel. So they ate fleishiks for lunch, and that took place after he finished his shear. So let's say they ate fleishiks at around 1:30. I don't know exactly when. And then the staff, the cook and so forth, that were in charge of milchiks for dinner, they had to leave at a certain early hour. And basically, the time between the fleishika lunch that was served to the yeshiva students and the milchika dinner was considerably less than 6 hours. And he paskined that they could eat milchiks. They don't have to wait 6 hours. Why? Because misu'uda l'su'uda depends upon who sets up the suda. So let's say, for example, if you're a son in your mother's house, so she'll decide when she serves the suda on a regular basis. I'm not talking on an exceptional basis. But if you're not at home eating your mother's food, but rather you're eating the yeshiva food, then the yeshiva itself, based on its staff and the needs of its staff, will determine when is misu'uda l'suda, what are the times that the meals are being served. And that's called misu'uda l'suda. Just mentioning it in passing, I thought it was fascinating. Okay. Omar Shmuel, Ano lahon milsa, Kala bar chamra legabe Abba. I too am like vinegar to wine compared to my father in this context. Dilu Abba avisayer nichse. Just 1 second, in a different context. Okay, so the introduction to this little shtickle Gemara is that a person should be very careful about his fields and his properties, visiting them on a daily basis to make sure, to supervise, make sure everything is done well. Otherwise, heaven forbid, he might lose, his property. And Shmuel says about his father that he was in agriculture. He went out to his fields twice a day to make sure that everything was taken care of. Anah, says Shmuel, but as far as myself is concerned, I go once a day. Shmuel itamei, the Omar Shmuel, man desire nichse kol yom mishkach astira. You will find some sort of a prize, as if you found like a lost pocketbook full of money because you visit your fields on a daily basis, once a day. And it sounds like Shmuel is kind of encouraging us to do this, to visit our fields and supervise it on a daily basis, because he's saying, you'll get a reward. It's like as if man will fall from heaven, you'll get some sort of great reward. So Abaye Avisayed Nichse Kol Yom V'Yoma. And the Gemara tells a story that demonstrates Shmuel's reasoning. Yom Achada Poga Ba'arise Didori Pischa Diofi. He had a sharecropper, Abaye, who was in charge of the field, harvesting and so forth and so on. And he caught him red-handed, stealing from his field. Probably if he stole on that particular day that Abaye caught him, he probably stole on a regular basis. Amalei Hani Lecha. So Abai sort of plays what we call in Yiddish damavat. He makes himself like he's dumb, and he says, "Well, where are you taking all this stuff?" Amalei Lebe Mahar. So this Aris, who's a Ghana, he's embarrassed. He doesn't want to admit that he was stealing, wood or whatever it was from the field. So he says, "I was on my way to bring it to your house." Amalei. In other words, Abai says, I don't fall for this. Kvar kadmuch rabbanan means I already have a principle from Shmuel that I heard the rabbis that a person has to watch his field and scrutinize and supervise because he may catch a gun. Rav Asi used to actually go out on a daily basis to fulfill Shmuel's dictum and check out his fields. Omar, how come I don't get these gifts, these rewards that Shmuel promised me? Yom Echad, on one occasion, Chazat Sinora de Bidka Biare. What happened was there was an irrigation canal that would bring water, in small volumes of water gradually into his field to water his field. And on that day, lo and behold, Ravasi finds that the water is streaming into his field, about to inundate his field. There was a crack in the canal, in the irrigation canal. So to stop the bleeding, so to speak, as an urgent, immediate method, so Shakal Leglime, he like took off his coat and the karche, he rolled it up, right? And osfe begava, and he sort of like stuffed it into this crack, but that wouldn't last very long. And therefore Ramakol, he started screaming out. And he said, I need help over here. Osu Inchi, and people came by to help Ravasi, Sachrua, and they dammed up this irrigation canal that was about to inundate his whole field. Omar, then he declared, Ashkechsiru lekulo istri devar. I got all these gifts, that Shmuel, because my field would be worth nothing. Okay, now we start what I don't know if you call it the main sugya for today, but I would call it the main halachic sugya for today, because the business of supervising and scrutinizing your field, I wouldn't call that halacha per se. It's more a begetter eitzah tova. But now we have something called Mayim Rishonim and Mayim Achronim. So we know what this is. Mayim Rishonim is when you wash hands before the meal. Mayim Achronim is when you wash hands after the meal. Now, you and I would probably say, correct me if I'm wrong, that Mayim Rishonim is much more important than Mayim Achronim. But that's not necessarily so simple. Omer Rav Idi bar Oven, Omer Rav Yitzchak bar Ashyon, Mayim Rishonim mitzvah, ve'achronim chova. Now, the word mitzvah might be interpreted as saying, that it's a good thing to do, but it's not a full-fledged chova. Maybe it's only derabanan and so forth and so on. But achronim, that's an absolute obligation. That's a chova. And the reason for this is because there's a residue of food accumulating on his hands during the course of the meal. And we're going to soon see that it might be salt, which could be very dangerous if he touches his eyes. I'll just mention my father-in-law, Zocher Latov. He was very, very careful and very makpid about Mayim Achronim. He used to always quote this Gemara because he knew that we were laid back about Mayim Achronim. He would say, Mayim Achronim Chova. Meisvei, the Gemara questions this ruling of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ashyan that Mayim Rishonim, it's only a knapper mitzvah, it's not so important. Meisvei, we learned in the Brayso Mayim Rishonim Achronim Chova. So we see that Mayim Rishonim are upgraded at least to equivalent status of Mayim Achronim. Don't put them down as only a mitzvah. Mayim Rishonim are also a chova. We're going to soon see later on that they establish a brach on Mayim Rishonim. And tzoyim, if let's say in the middle of the meal, you feel that your hands are sticky, so between one course and another, they bring, we used to call it palate cleansers. I don't know. But anyway, they used to dip their fingers into water. That's rishus. That's up to you. So right now we see that we're upgrading Mayim Rishonim to an equal status of chova like Mayim Achronim. Not the way Rav Idi had said it. And the Gemara responds by saying, mitzvah l'gabi rishus chova karile. Meaning that the word mitzvah, which indicates a lower level than chova, but sometimes you will use the word chova when it's really only a mitzvah. So that which the Brisa says about Mayim Rishonim, that it's called a chova, that's a relative term. It's a borrowed term. It's not really a chova. It's only a mitzvah, as Rav Idi said. But we'll use the term mitzvah. We'll use the term chova to describe Mayim Rishonim only in contrast to Mayim Emtsoyim, which is a rishus. So relative to rishus, we have a chova, but that chova of Mayim Rishonim relative to the full-fledged chova of Mayim Achronim is only a mitzvah. And the Brisa will call it a chova only to contrast it with Mayim Emtsoyim. All right, so again, just to summarize, at this point in the sugya, Mayim Achronim, based on the statement of Rav Idi, seem to be more important halachically and more obligatory than Mayim Rishonim. Gufa, let's see if we can make sense out of this. Mayim Rishonim Achronim Chovem Toim Rishus Rishonim Notlim Bein Bekli Bein Al Gabi Karka. So let's say, for example, you're washing your hands before the meal outdoors, as they usually did in those times, and the water goes down onto the ground. That's fine. Achronim einotim elo bekli v'amalei notlin al gabi karka. Right, so Mayim Achronim requires a kli, and you can't pour the water of Mayim Achronim onto the ground. And we'll see why. Anyway, the Gemara asks, "My beinayhu," right? What's the difference between, what you call ein notlin al gabi karka, as opposed to Mayim Rishonim, which are notlin al gabi karka? Ika beinayhu kinsa. Kinsa are little wood pieces, or chips, if you will. And according to, you have to keep in mind that the chips are not called a kli. And according to the second Lishna that says, Ein notlim agabi karka, so since he pours the water onto these wood chips, it's not agabi karka, and therefore washing Mayim Achronim over these wood chips is okay. But according to the first girsa, that says that Achronim ein notlim ela bikli, and the word bikli means that the water has to be poured into a vessel, and wood chips is not a vessel. Mayim Rishonim notlim bein becham and bein betzonim. We're going to be much more laid back about Mayim Rishonim. You could have hot water and use hot water to wash your hands, but Achronim ein notlin ela betzonim. Why? What's terrible about using hot water, as long as you don't scald your fingers, for my machronim. And the Gemara explains, based on this brisa, that mitnei shechamin mefafin es hayadayim, ve'im avirin es hazuama. The whole purpose of my machronim is to remove, all that greasy stuff that's on your fingers. And apparently, the Gemara, in the name of this brisa, is arguing that hot water will not remove the grease from your hands, from your fingers. He says in the name of Rashi that the hot water will actually do the opposite effect. It'll cause the food residue to be absorbed further into the hands. Mayim rishonim notlin bein b'cham and bein b'tzonim. Okay, now how hot can the water be for mayim rishonim? That's going to be the Gemara that we're going to study now on Amud Beis.